All right, so part one to making your image look a little bit better for your portrait is we always start with our cropping tool. So we click on the cropping tool here. Don't forget, we're going to check out the different properties of that cropping tool. We're going to use the width and height and resolution cropping tool. We are going to set our width and height to 8 by 10 by 150. Remember that's sort of a random number if you want to do 8 by 12. So let's see if I go horizontally here. See, I'm missing a little bit of this picture here in the proportions. If I change this to 12, I can get the whole picture in there, but because I'm going to use maybe traditional picture frame, I'm going to keep it 8 by 10. I'm going to flip to the vertical. I'm going to bring down my top here a little bit. And again, I'm going to think about the rule of thirds. So I'm going to put my subject here so I have a little bit on the top, but I'm going to try to put her into that, her face, which is the point of focus, into that upper left rule of thirds right there. All right, once I get it, I'm going to hit the check mark or a return, and I'm going to hit Command plus. There we go, make it a little bit bigger. So that's step one. So what this does is I resize my image so it's not an enormous file. I have it cropped to the right dimensions, and I'm ready to go. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my levels. It's always something that I do right away. As you become more advanced, you won't necessarily use the levels anymore. You might use curves, something different. But for us, we're going to stick with levels. So we're going to go the black and white cookie. We're going to look at our list here, and I see levels right here. I'm going to look at my histogram for my levels. Oops. And I'm going to see that it actually looks pretty good. I got my darker values here, my middles and my highlights. I'm going to bring this down here to the tip of the mountain. I'm going to bring my black over here. And I'm going to close this down. And I can see here that this is before and this is after. Not, too dramatic, but you can see that it's dull, it's a little bit brighter. All right, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to correct the color. Right now you look at this color here, and she's sort of an orangish, yellowish color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my background because I'm going to put the layer here. I'm going to go to my black and white cookie. I'm going to find photo filter. All right, what photo filter does, it's a really quick one. It just adjusts, so if it's warm right now and I want to cool it off, I go to cooling filter, and there we go. It makes it a beautiful, more lifelike, more realistic color palette, skin tone. You can, and again, it's non-destructive. Feel free to try any of these. Cyan, you'll see the magenta makes it too pink that way. There's all sorts of different ways that you can go here. You can try the different cooling filters. That one's a little bit purpley. The 82 is just about the perfect fit right there. All right. Now, if you want a little bit more control over it, that's a very, very, very intro level thing to do. So I'm going to drop this in the trash here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my black and white cookie again, and this time I'm going to use something called color balance. And what the color balance does is you can see here that it's showing you the opposites of color. So the opposite of red is cyan, the opposite of magenta is green, the opposite of blue is yellow. So if you have too much of one color in your picture, like too much red, I start to slide this over to the cyan side over here. And then I say, oh, I see your hair is turning green. I see too much green in here, so I start to slide this over to the magenta side, like so. I can also take out a little bit of that yellow in here as well. And I just start sliding these things around here a little bit. Too much magenta in my picture, so I'm going to come back in this direction. Too much red, I'm still going to push it this way just a little bit. All right, and again, there are other ways of doing this, right? But this is just a very basic way of getting the right color here. There's white balance tips and curves and all sorts of stuff. But again, for the beginner, this is pretty good. So you can see here, before, after, makes a world of difference right there. All right, so that looks pretty good. She's got a little bit of a warm tone still from that light, but her skin tones are looking a little bit better. All right, so I get all that stuff together. So the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to work on smoothing her skin, right? So if I look closely here, I can see she's got this bag under her eye here. She's got these little blemishes, this curve on her face. So what we're going to do is we're going to do the sort of the cheaters high pass or high frequency, low frequency skin smoothing, right? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go to my background. I'm going to right click on the background and make a duplicate layer. All right, I'm going to call this one blur skin. There we go, perfect. And then I'm going to make another, well, actually, let's do one at a time. So I'm going to do blur skin. All right, so for blur skin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my filter. I'm going to go to blur, and I'm going to say Gaussian blur. And this is what, in the professional photo community, they would start to call the low frequency. And again, this is not true low frequency, but it's for our purposes it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look closely at her skin here, maybe under the eye, and I'm going to look for when that skin the texture just starts to disappear. I don't want to do too much because then she's going to look like a plastic robot. But I'm going to do just enough to sort of soften that skin up. So maybe, I don't know, 1.5. And I'm going to say OK. So it starts to soften it up here. Now, I want to use this layer, and I'm going to paint out some of these other imperfections in her skin. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. So I'm going to click on this layer button, making sure that I'm right above blur skin. So here's the empty layer at the top. I'm going to double click. I'm going to call this layer heal, right? Because that's going to be the healing layer right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my healing tool. So I'm going to click on the Band-Aid over here. I'm going to hold down on it. I'm going to select healing brush tool like this. Okay. Then I'm going to select up here. I don't want to say current layer. I'm going to say current and below because I want to sample colors from below. Right, and then I'm going to start to paint on here. Remember, this is my brush size. This is the hardness of that brush and the spacing. I'm going to start with about 20%. And 15 sounds pretty good here. And then I hold down my Option key. It gives me a target. I click once with my mouse, and I'm going to sample from this area. I'm going to let go, and then I'm going to start painting. And you can see everything underneath that little X is getting painted into my model here. All right, now this is the art of photography, right? Literally, we are using this skin tone here. I'm painting out the imperfections here to paint it, right? Literally, like you'd paint a painting. I'm trying to smooth the skin over. I'm trying to match the right color tones. I'm trying to get rid of any imperfections here. And this is a fine art. I mean, it really is. So here I'm going to say Option. I'm going to paint this part of her face here. I'm going to try to lighten that a little bit. It looks a little bit freaky here, but not too bad, right? And I'm starting to smooth that out a little bit. You know, if there's any marks under here, anything that's sort of strange, like a strange shadow, I'm going to click that out of here. I'm going to look up here on the side of her head. I'm going to select this part. I'm going to paint this in a little bit here to get rid of that blemish. She's got this wrinkle across the front of her head. I'm going to hit Option, and I'm going to paint that out. Again, selecting oftentimes to get a good variety of tones here. She's got another line up here. All right, I might, if her forehead's too bright here, I might paint this in a little bit with some of these adjoining colors here. Like so, and I'm just trying to smooth out her skin. So this is before, and that's after, right? A huge difference. Let's zoom in again. Again, spacebar lets you navigate a little bit. You know, if she's got things down here in her chin, I'm just going to sort of wipe these out here, try to smooth out this skin tone here so that her skin is just a little bit more evenly toned. All right, and you can go, like I said, you can go crazy with this. I think I'm always a fan, for the most part, of Photoshop, where I say less is more, right? All right, so there we go, getting rid of that line. You know, she's got some stuff by her nose here. Let's sort of maybe soften this out a little bit here. That. Maybe that's a little too much. Yeah, so, you know, and again, if this gets too funky over here, that's the nice thing about this. I can just take my eraser tool, and I can erase anything from that layer. I'm just erasing from this healing layer here, right? So I go back to my healing brush. Again, I'm going to Option click this part, smooth that over. All right, again, maybe I screwed up the nose there a little bit, but that's just fine. All right, so let's go out. Yeah, so her nose looks a little bit strange there, but you'll get the idea. So we're smoothing out that skin. So again, this is before, and this is after. If this part is also a little bit too dark here, I can take the opacity of my healing layer, and I can bring it down just a little bit so that I still see a little bit more of that detail in there, but just nothing quite as harsh in there. Bring it down just a little bit more. There we go, just like that. All right, so it looks pretty good. So again, here's before, here's after. All right, so that's the next step. So then, after we sort of heal out that skin, we need to put a little bit more detail back because we blurred out her eyes and everything's not quite as sharp. So I'm going to go back to my background. I'm going to right-click on it. I'm going to say Duplicate Layer. I'm going to call this one High Pass. Now again, this is going to be our high frequency layer, and it's not a true high frequency layer. It's sort of a cheater's way of doing it. but it's going to bring back some detail for us. All right, so what I'm going to do with my high pass layer now is I'm going to move it to the top over heal, but underneath my color adjustments here. I'm going to say filter, I'm going to go to other, and I'm going to say high pass. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust my high pass filter here so that the color just starts to break. So I'm going to say, I don't know, 3.5 or so, where I can just start to see a little bit of color underneath here, but I don't want it to be too bright. I say OK, like so, and then I'm going to go to normal, and I'm going to say overlay. All right, and what this does is you can see here is it brings back a little bit of detail, but this is with and without that layer on here, right? There's all that. Here it's back this way. Now what I'm going to do with my high pass filter, though, is I want to soften the face again. So I'm going to go to my layer mask, which is this white rectangle with a black box here. I'm going to go to my black paintbrush, which is right below here. All right, I'm going to make sure the color is black, and I can flip-flop those colors here with this little arrow. Here is my brush adjustment. So my hardness is like at, I'm going to say, I don't know, around 60%. My diameter is way too large right now. That's better. And then just leave the brush shape alone. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint out everything that I want to be sharp. And now one thing you can do is I have, like, this is almost the opposite, right? Like I'm going to paint everything that I want to be smooth, but you could also do it so that you said edit, fill, and I'm going to fill it with black. So I just filled my layer mask with black, making sure it was selected. So now you can't see it at all. And I'm going to go back with white, and I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to paint out her eyes. Zoom in a little bit. All right, I'm going to make my brush smaller. I'm going to paint out sort of the edge of her nose here. Right. I'm going to paint out her teeth. Right, and her lips a little bit. Right, and again, how much you feather this in here is how natural it's going to look. I might want to do her hair a little bit, so I'm going to make the brush a little bigger. I'm going to paint along her hair and this headband up here, just so it's a little sharper like that. But I'm going to let it get soft in the back. And it also depends on how, and here you can see the white is drawing over here. It depends on how soft you want everything, how you want to fix everything up. There are other things like this hair that I might heal out of here. I might change some of this hair down here. But again, we're just sort of looking at skin tone. So if I go like so, that's before, and that's after so far. It looks much better, right? Much softer. So there you go. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I want to soften this background up a little bit, because right now it's a little bit harsh still. So what I'm going to do is I'm once again going to say background, duplicate layer. I'm going to call this one background blur. I'm going to drag this one all the way to the top again, but underneath my color corrections. So these are always at the very top. I'm going to take my background blur. I'm going to go to filter again. I'm going to say blur, and I'm going to say Gaussian blur. This time I'm going to super blur the background because I want the curtains to really disappear in the back. I'm going to say OK. There we go. So now I have a blurry layer, and now I'm going to put another layer mask and cut through this one. So I'm going to say layer mask. I am going to apply black on here. So I'm going to flip-flop my colors. I'm going to use this brush, but I'm going to make it much larger. I'm using the apostrophe key here, or the bracket key. And then I'm just going to click here, and let's turn down the opacity of this to 30. And I'm going to click right on her face. Here you go. I'm going to click again. I'm going to click again. And I'm just clicking a little bit, and you can see here the gray is building. And this is, it's sort of a softy effect here. You can go as far out to the outside as you need to make her sort of glow like so. There you go. So there's just a little bit of detail in that curtain, but I'm sort of bringing it out there. But this way it also takes care of some of that flyaway hair and all that. So again, here's before, and here's after. Right, a pretty dramatic difference there. Right, sort of softens everything up. And again, these are not necessarily huge changes, but there are things that just sort of improve the overall quality of that image. All right, so that is step one, and then we'll move on in the video to watch step two.